the heart of Wilder, Kentucky, a chilling melody echoes through the night, as if the very walls of the old dance hall whisper secrets of a tormented past. They say the gateway to hell lies in its basement, where sinister forces play with the living. Here, the tragic tale of Pearl Bryan unfolds, her headless specter wandering in eternal search of peace. As the clock strikes midnight, the air thickens with the scent of blood and roses, a grim reminder of the love and violence that stain the very fabric of Bobby Mackey's world. This is not just a story, it's a journey into the darkest corners of the human soul, where reality and nightmares blend into a haunting melody of the past.
Welcome back to Retraced Echoes. As always, I'm your host. My name is Burton. Today we're stepping into the eerie world of Bobby Mackey's Haunted Dance Hall. Now that's a place where the music's never really stopped. And to be honest, some of the guests, well, they never left. Nestled in the heart of, I don't know why I say crazy stuff like that. It's for the fun. It's for the funs, man. Anyways, nestled in the heart of Wilder, Kentucky, and this honky tonk's been spinning records and chilling spines since the late 19th centuries. But folks, this ain't your average foot tapping juke joint. Oh no, it's more like a foot dragging ghost haunting hotspot where the past was more alive than the present. They say the building sits on a portal to hell and, well, with its history of murder, loss of life, and satanic ritual, well, there's no wonder the spirits seem to be lined up for just one last dance. Now, whether that's Pearl Bryan, the headless apparition, or Johanna, now she was the one that had a love story that ended so tragically. This place is like a who's who of the spectral world. So grab your EMF detector and your holy water, because at Bobby Mackey's, well, the spirits are always looking for a haunting good time. So let's dive deep into the history, the horror, and the downright spooky happenings that makes this dance hall one of the most haunted hotspots this side of the afterlife. Let's stop talking about it. Let's be about it. Let's go. Now, of course, we got to start this story with the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Bobby Mackey. Now, Bobby Mackey, he was a classic country music performer. He had been touring for like an entire decade. Before that, he worked for the railroad, and he left there to basically pursue his singing career. And then he did that for 10 years. His ultimate dream, though, was to own a nightclub, and he found just the spot. It was a former rock and roll bar in Wilder, Kentucky, and he couldn't wait to show his expecting wife Janet just the spot. Now, this was his dream. This is something that he had talked to Janet about for a while, but the struggle that he always had was finding the right club owners, because he wanted, obviously, to find a spot that there'd be some type of enjoyment of his style of music. And when you know you have a niche, in his case, classic country music, you know there's opportunity. So getting people into the, in this case, dance club, you got to hit the ground running. And that is exactly what Bobby Mackey did. Now, as Bobby and Janet pull into the potential hot spot, Bobby, he's a thinker. He jumps out of the vehicle and he runs around the other side and cracks open the door. Got to make a good first impression for Janet. And I believe Bobby might have been a bit of a charmer. But anyway, he's showing kind of the location off. Now, Janet, she had been looking at this location as they pulled up. She wanted to love this location as much as Bobby did. But her eyes became fixated on the club's back door. Now, why is that, you probably wonder? Well, from the time they pulled in, she watched that door fly wide open, almost as though it was calling to her. Now, that's quite a welcoming gesture, if you're being honest, wouldn't you say? But she instantly looks at Bobby and says, "Did you see that?" Now, Bobby, he wanted to calm everything down, right? We can't have her thinking no crazy thoughts right off the get-go. He basically says, "Hey, the door probably wasn't latched all the way. The wind probably blew the door wide open." To be honest, I probably would have assumed the same exact thing. But Janet was like, meh, my gut's saying no on this one. But he was still able to convince her to walk inside. Now, they walked into the location. There was some obvious apprehension on the side of Janet, but Bobby was seeing all of his dreams being fulfilled. Now, he wanted to check out the rest of the location, and he asked Janet to check out the kitchen. It was a huge kitchen, and he knew that if she saw it, she couldn't help but fall in love. Now, as she walked into the kitchen, that's when things started getting a little interesting. Now, as she walked into the kitchen, she started hearing noises right away, very subtle movements. But honestly, that could be anything. I mean, this could be a rodent. The building has been unoccupied for a while. It could have been the opening and closing of the door. It could have caused pressure, a change in pressure, should I say. Could have been her opening just the kitchen door, the door that led just to the kitchen itself. Could have caused there to be a shift in the movement of something in the room. But it was the next series of sounds that she heard that kind of caught her attention. It almost sounded like distant whispering. But again, maybe it's someone outside. Maybe Bobby was talking to someone. Maybe someone walked in and now Bobby's talking to him. But Janet, she's seen and heard enough. She wanted to be done with the kitchen. But as she walked out the door, there stood Bobby. "Who was you talking to?" she asked. Now Bobby, he was completely confused. Talking to? Nobody. She was completely confused. "What do you mean? I heard voices. I know you was talking to someone." Down deep inside, I believe that she probably knew that neither one of the voices was that of Bobby. But I also believe, much like myself, had I heard something like this, I would want an explanation for what I heard, especially if I knew it was just me and supposedly one other person inside the building. When it's outside, you kind of know the difference in how things sound. And I believe that she knew that. But anyway, Bobby, he was like, "There's no one. It's just me and you here. But what do you think of the spot?" Now, Janet, again, like I said at the beginning, she wanted to love this spot. She knew that his heart was set on this place. He already had a vision for what the place could be. But she also couldn't lie to him. "I don't have a good feeling about this place," she would say. She was ready to go home. She didn't want to be in this place anymore. Now, Bobby couldn't think of anything other than this building. He had a dream. He had a vision. He could already hear the music in his head. He could see the lights. He could see the crowds, the dancing. This was his dream after all. And in a very short time frame because of that, Bobby had already went to the bank, signed the bank loan, all to get it. Now, Janet had every right to feel the way that she felt. To her, there was something going on with this location, but she wasn't going to stop Bobby from his dream. After all, I've said this numerous times, fear and your imagination, they can have a field day on you if you let them. Now, there was only one way to make this dream turn into reality, and that's to begin the process. So they started jumping in, cleaning up the spot. Bobby wanted to get this thing up and moving as quickly as he could. Now, one day, they were both cleaning up when they heard someone come through the front door. It was a young man, Carl Lawson, and he had a little bit of history on the building. Now, he'd worked for the previous owner as a handyman, but he lost a job after a series of events that shut the club down. Now, you might be asking, what was those series of events? Well, it was a series of brutal murders. You heard that right. But let me say it just a little bit louder for the folks in the back. It was a series of brutal murders. That's what this location was all about. Do you know what's worse than a series of brutal murders? Not hitting that doggone subscribe button. You better hit that subscribe button. Just kidding. Maybe not. Now, to give you an idea of how dangerous this location was, in the last year, it had seen 6 homicides. Now, some might say, well, maybe it's the location. Maybe security wasn't strong enough. I think others would also say, well, maybe it's attracting the wrong crowd. Now, every single one of these thoughts completely valid. Maybe that is the case. But I personally believe that sometimes certain places will attract a certain emotion to a person. Now, I believe that happens in everyday life. In fact, I think we can all see it in practice where you work at. You've probably either worked at or you currently work for some place where there's one person who is constantly negative. They hate everything, everyone, every meeting. They hate coming into work. They can't wait until Friday and they let everybody know. I believe that one person's energy can bring down an entire organization. I am someone who I will feed off of energy, whether it's positive, negative. I can't be around that kind of person. But it's not just people. I also feed off of TV shows, movies, podcasts. And I think that each one of you also probably do that. So I have to add positive influence things every single day. I'll give you a prime example. Before I started doing this channel, this podcast, as a paranormal channel where we look at haunted locations, haunted families, I started looking at becoming a true crime channel. Why? Well, the truth is I'm somewhat fascinated by true crime. Every week I will generally listen to some type of true crime myself. Now, because I'm interested in true crime, I thought, man, this would be a great idea for me to start up a channel. The first thing I was going to cover, super ambitious, O.J. Simpson, Nicole Brown Simpson case. I know. Super ambitious on that one. I was swinging for the stars, baby. That's a mighty hefty first episode, if I say so myself. But as I was doing the research on the case, I couldn't help but feel somewhat sympathetic for the family. If they heard my podcast, what would they think? Would they revisit this horrific event? Then I couldn't help but think of what the last moments of Nicole would have been. The suffering that she endured. Ronald Goldman? Think about what he went through. But on top of all that, on top of everything else, I was trying to understand what would possess someone to become so angry to do something like that, which was so horrific to another human being. Now, I understand that this happens every day. I understand that. People suffer every day. But to me, that takes a toll. I knew in my heart's heart that I wouldn't be able to do that every single week. I wouldn't be able to create a podcast that people could listen to and not have it take a huge toll on me. I believe that whatever's inside of me as a person, as far as when I go into a haunted location, I can also feel that energy. In fact, I think I got a story that will somewhat fit and explain kind of what I'm trying to get across here. It was many years back, my wife Jess and I went on vacation to North Carolina. While we was there, she got tickets to, it was like a ghost walk or a ghost tour walk. It doesn't matter. Anyway, it was to, I want to say the name of the place was like Haunted Wilmington. I'm going to double check that when I get done recording and see if that's what it is. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. But what they would do is they would take you around Wilmington to locations that are known as haunted. They would tell the history of what happened and then the current ghost events that was occurring now. Super cool place. To a degree, that's what I wanted to do with this channel. What I wanted to do was to talk about haunted locations or haunted family and go into the story of what that haunting is. Anyway, I've got so many things running through my mind on this. Anyway, so we're maybe 30 minutes into this walk. I'm having a blast. I'm listening to the history. I'm loving what they're talking about when it comes to what apparitions they're seeing, the photos that's been taken. But we're like 30 minutes into this walk. I think the walk was all the way around like 45 minutes or an hour. So we's probably like the third of, I think they went to 5 locations. They've got like 15, 20, 25 locations, something like that. And they only do 5 per each one of those. So you could like set up different nights and see different things. But we're going to like the 4th one in our list of 5. And when we're heading there, I'm feeling fine. Everything's going good. And then all of a sudden, I started feeling off. My stomach started churning. I started feeling off mentally. At one point, I look at Jess and I'm like, hey, I'm just going to chill back here. Okay, you go ahead and go up there. I don't want to draw attention to myself. Let's be honest. I'm one of those guys. Let me do this in private kind of guy. You know what I'm saying? Like if I'm going to get sick, I don't want everyone to know that I'm sick. Now, as I'm back away from the group, I'm trying to navigate the mistakes that I made with food that could have caused any of this. But the guide, he started talking to the people about people who were sensitive to the paranormal world would sometimes get sick on that exact location. Now, I didn't hear any of this. He had 0 clue that I was standing away from the group. He had 0 clue that I was feeling like crap. Let's be honest, I'm pretty good at hiding pain. I'm pretty good at hiding sickness. Now, what it was this location was the site of some gallows. Gallows being places where they would hang people. But the ships that would come into Wilmington, let's say a pirate got onto their ship and they found out when they would come in, when they would port, they would take them to this location and basically their fate would be made there. They would be hung on the spot. Now, the tour guide, he told the story as he always did, and he would basically say anyone that would get so far away from this location, I forget how far he said, let's just say for all intents and purposes, 30 steps. People that walk 30 steps away, they start feeling better. And Jess came over, she told me all this stuff. I'm like, I don't think that's what it is, but okay. I swear, we get whatever that distance is, I was totally fine. It was kind of like that location was affecting me directly. Now, to think that could happen to me on a spiritual realm, if that truly is what it was. Now, for the record, I didn't get sick anymore the entire time we were there. It was literally walking up to that location. I couldn't even get all the way to the location. I think I may have walked up there and then walked back. I'm like, I can't. I feel too far off. Anyway, if that can happen to me on that kind of level, what's to say that it can't happen to someone else aggressively? In my mind, I think sometimes we all can become open vessels to maybe a location. And I think that's what happened for Bobby Mackey's location. But that's just my thought process on it all. Anyway, back to the story. Bobby's having this conversation with Carl. Carl's like, hey, we had all this stuff going on. Now, Bobby, similar to what I was talking about in the beginning, he was like, you know what? We're not going to be attracting that kind of a crowd. This is old classic country music. So those people aren't going to be coming here to be aggressive when it comes to country music. Now, Bobby, knowing that Carl probably knew all the ins and outs of the building, he saw a prime opportunity. He said, Carl, come work for me. And he hired him right on the spot as a handyman, a caretaker. Carl needed the job. He was super happy to see, if anything, maybe this building could change from what he knew as a super aggressive, tough kind of building and crowd. One that was full of anger, one that was full of death. He wanted to see a change there also. Now, Janet was super glad to have someone else around the location also. Janet and Carl become friends relatively quickly. She kind of looked at him like a little brother to a degree. And it's no secret that having him around definitely helped Bobby also. Bobby didn't believe in all the ghost things. He didn't see the ghosts or the spooky things that was going on as something that could even happen. Now, Janet, on the other hand, she started asking questions like things about the building, what was going on previously, some of the strange things that was happening to people inside the residence. Now, even though Bobby didn't believe in all this, he kind of thought maybe something was up with the location. Not necessarily from a ghostly spiritual position, but he definitely felt like there was something there. Now, one day, Carl, he was in the process, he was getting ready to go paint a different part of the building. And he told Janet, because she was in the kitchen, she was trying to get everything ready. He was like, if you need anything, you just give me a yell. I'm not going to be very far. She said, okay. And she continued to clean up the kitchen because, again, they're trying to get this spot ready. While she's cleaning, she hears a noise. It's almost like it was coming from a pot behind her or maybe some of the pans. So the curiosity got the best of her. She turns around. She's kind of looking around, trying to do a little bit of investigating. Now, while she's looking, she hears, it was almost like a gurgling noise. She was completely, I guess maybe like a bubbling noise would probably be something better. Not necessarily gurgling. Gurgling, bubbling, whatever, something along that lines. And it was coming from the sink. So she very slowly went to where the sound of the noise is coming out from. She's going to the sink. She started to venture over the sink to see if she could see something. Maybe it was a clogged pipe. She was confused on what would make that sound though. And as she slowly peeked over the edge, she saw it. It was blood that was coming from the drain up. Now, for her, this was shocking. She just kind of stood there confused, like, what would cause this? Then she began backing up. Think about it. If your brain just saw that out of nowhere, blood seeping up from a drain, how would you react? I think I would stand there for a minute and make sure what I'm seeing is right. And I think that's exactly what happened. Now, as she's backing up, there's something that's pushing her back towards the sink. So she's fighting it. She's trying to get it back in. And she said it felt like a hand was on her back and shoving her into the sink. Now, as this is happening, it's also pushing her down, almost like it's trying to submerge her face into that blood. Now, she began to scream. She's trying to push her face away, but it was trying to physically push it right into that blood. Now, her arms, she was trying to extend fully away from the sink as far as she could. She knew that someone or something was fighting her and trying to drown her in that blood. Now, it got so bad that even her boots was starting to slide on the floor. She was in the fight for her life, and just as her face was about to be submerged, Carl came running in. He had heard the screams. He grabbed her, and from the moment that he released that grip, she didn't know what to do with herself. She was crying. She goes, "There's blood in the sink. Someone's trying to push my face in there." As he glanced over the sink, there was nothing there. It was completely empty. There was no sign of anything even being in there. Now, Janet, she looked and she was completely confused. None of this made any kind of sense. So Janet went to Bobby and told him basically what happened. Now, Janet went to Bobby. She told him exactly what happened. She said she was in the kitchen by herself. She heard something. She looked into the sink and then it was filling up with blood. Then she said she felt a hand on her back and was pushing her into the sink and then pushing her head into the blood. Now, Bobby, he had a hard time understanding what could possibly have went through her head. How could this be possible? He asked questions about, was the blood still there? No, it's not there now. None of it made any sense. He thought that Janet and Carl, because Carl, he believed Janet. He had obviously had stories. He thought they were both crazy. He was somewhat in denial. Now, Bobby sends Janet away. He's like, "Hey, I need to talk to Carl on his own. Just me and Carl for a little bit. I'll have you come back, but I need to talk to Carl." So she walks away and he tells Carl, he says, "Hey, sit down. We need to have a little conversation, just me and you, about expectations going forward. I don't want to hear any more about this foolish, spooky talk. No more supernatural, no more ghosts, no more of this haunting crap around Janet. Okay, she's feeding off of it." He tells Carl, "If I hear this one more time, anything about ghost stories, paranormal stories, any of that, I'm going to have to fire you and I'll hire someone else that can do the job that doesn't have ghost stories." And Carl, he didn't want to lose his job. Could you imagine though? It's not like he was doing anything other than telling stories from things that he believed had happened at that location. If anything, it should be seen as information. But Bobby didn't see it that way. But it would be Carl's stories that moves this story along. Now, one night, shortly after all this, Officer Larry Hornsby was making his rounds around town. Basically, what they would do is drive around town and look for anything that was suspicious. They wanted to keep Water, Kentucky as safe as possible. He pulls into Bobby Mackey's and he's looking through the window. And as he looks through the window, he sees somebody passing by it. Now, he had a suspicion that someone had broken in and possibly they were stealing stuff. So he called for backup and he slowly started approaching the building. Now, much like the first time Janet gazed at the building and how the back door had opened up, it did the same thing with him, almost like it was inviting him in. But his thoughts was that maybe this was the entryway that these people broke in. Now, his backup ended up arriving and they both entered the building with flashlights in hand and they started walking around the location searching for intruders. Now, from the backstage area, It started playing music. Now, these officers knew that something was up. They had their hands on their guns. They were ready to go. They knew exactly where their intruders were now. "Police, come out," the officer said as they inched closer and closer. Now, Larry, he had heard the voice of a man and a woman, and he was sure that they was playing a radio. Now, as they pulled back the curtain, there was nothing there. It was completely empty. They searched it completely, and just as they were about to complete the search, they heard the front door slam. So they rushed to the front door. Again, nothing. None of this made any kind of sense. The police officer, Larry, he said there was no wind. There was nothing that could have closed the door. He basically said that he was completely stunned by it all. In his own plain words, stunned. And his biggest fear became that when they was getting to the point to where they're doing the report, because the backup who came there was like, "What do we put in the report?" He's like, "We can't put any of this ghost stuff in there. If we do, they're going to say I'm going to need a psychiatrist. I'm not going to put any of that in there." He said, "Let's just put that we went to the building, we checked it out, there was no one there, and we left it at that." Now, a few nights later, Larry would find himself right back at this nightclub, Bobby Mackey's nightclub. The way that happens is there was a fatal car accident. He was the responding officer, him and his partner. When they get there, there's 2 deceased bodies. So they pull the bodies, put them on the ground. They're looking for a cloth to cover the bodies, and they have nothing. There's nothing in the cruiser. They call over to the MT saying, "Hey, we need you guys to get over here. We need something at a minimum to cover the bodies until we get this wrapped up." Now, as they're doing that, some woman from behind them comes up. She's got cloths in her hands. Larry looks at her. He's completely confused, and she hands him the cloths. He thanks her. Now, as she's walking away and he's trying to get everything squared up, he sees that she goes over to Bobby Mackey's and goes in the back door. He didn't expect that. So they end up clearing the scene. They wanted to, if anything, go back and explain, "Hey, we can't give these tablecloths back. Obviously, you can see why they were used, but thank you for them." They go over to the building. They knock on the door. Nothing. She never came to the door. So they were completely perplexed. They were going to go back to Bobby Mackey's the next afternoon. So the next afternoon, they go back over to Bobby Mackey's and they ask Bobby, "Hey, did you hear about that accident last night?" He goes, "Yeah, read about it in the newspaper." They said, "Well, we believe your waitress brought out 2 of your tablecloths. You're probably 2 tablecloths short right now, but she brought it out. We want to thank you so much. We didn't have anything." Now, Bobby's completely confused. He was like, "No one's been here since 10 o'clock yesterday." And that's not even the craziest stories. Just a few nights later, Carl's on what we'll call light bulb duty. He knows that there's a light bulb out on the actual staircase going up. So the staircase goes one way, then it turns and then goes up a different way. So he knows that light bulb's out in the middle, can't be out. So he goes and gets another light bulb, goes to the staircase. As he goes to the staircase, he reaches up and he unscrews the light bulb, pulls it out, puts it away, grabs the new light bulb. As he puts it in, you know how sometimes you feel like it's threading in, but it's not? He turns it. He thinks it's threaded in. He goes to release it to turn it some more. And as he released it, it fell from his hand down to the floor and shattered into about 1,000,000 little pieces. Now, Janet's in the next room. She hears all of this. She comes in. She comes running. She goes, "Carl, what happened?" He goes, "Oh, I dropped this light bulb." She goes, "No problem. Go get another light bulb. I'll clean up all this glass because we want to make sure the glass is off the staircase." So he agrees. He goes to get the other light bulb. She grabs a broom. She's starting to clean it up. And as she's starting to clean it up, she's in the middle section of the staircase. So not on the ground floor, not on the top. She's in the middle. She's getting all the glass to the edge. As she gets it to the edge, she feels somebody push her. Now, they pushed her up against the wall the first time. Now, I can only assume there's a series of different thoughts that's going through her mind. First off, somebody just pushed me. And just as important, they pushed me on a stairway. Thought number 2, I am 5.5 months pregnant. Now, that's a very important number. 5.5 months pregnant. Remember that because we're going to be coming back to that later in the story. She starts to turn around to see who pushed her. As she does, she gets pushed again, but this time over the actual stairway. So she grabs hold of the banister with both hands. Her knuckles are turning white from holding it so tightly. Plop, plop, plop. Her boots are sliding against each one of the edges of the stairs and hits the next stair going down. She's starting to fall. She feels it. She's holding on to the banister for dear life. Plop, plop, plop. Having some more. Just as she tries to get to the point to where she starts to pull herself back up, her hands lose their grip and she ends up falling the rest of the way down the stairway. Da 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 da. She's now at the bottom of the stairs. She fell probably about 8 steps. She's laying at the very bottom trying to regain her composure. I can only assume the thoughts that's going through her mind. First off, who pushed me down this stairway? Who deliberately pushed me this hard down the stairway? For 2, is my baby okay? I'm 5.5 months pregnant. Am I okay? Is she okay? She was so scared to look behind her. As she looked up at the staircase, she saw a man grimacing down at her. As he turned to climb back up the stairs, just as quickly as she saw him, he vanished right before her very eyes. Now, Janet, she was rushed to the hospital. Obviously, she was pregnant. And of all things, when you're pregnant, probably one of the scariest things that could ever happen is that you fall, in this case, fall down a staircase. Now, the hospital wanted to understand what was going on. So they go to Bobby. Bobby, what happened? How did this happen to Janet? Well, she just slipped and fell down some stairs. Now, Janet had told Bobby on the way there everything that happened, that she went to go clean up the glass, that she was on the section of the stairs in the middle, that she was pushed. She went to turn around. She was pushed again, that she tried to hold on. When she fell down the staircase, when she was at the bottom, she looked up. She saw a man that disappeared. It was clearly a ghost. But how do you tell that to a hospital? I don't know that you can and not look as though you have some type of an issue. That said, my guess is when he was talking to the hospital, whoever the employee was, he probably also looked like he was lying. They probably knew that she did not slip and fall down the staircase. But I do believe in that exact moment, he did probably believe that there was more there than what meets the eyes. He might not believe in ghosts. He may not believe in spirits. He may not believe in any of that stuff. But I personally believe that he probably gave some type of credibility, if anything, to Janet in that moment. I mean, maybe these stories aren't just stories. I mean, first there was a story of Janet being pushed into the sink in the kitchen. Then there was the blood that was coming up to the sink. Then the cops had said the waitress brought 2 of those tablecloths. Now his wife is saying that she's being pushed down the stairs. As crazy and as sad as that story is, there was a glimmer of light. That night, as you heard Janet say, she did give birth to a baby girl. Though it was touch and go there for a while, like there was damage done when she fell down that staircase. The baby was clearly born prematurely, and they had to keep a very close eye on her for a few weeks. Now, once everything was in the clear, Bobby began the process of the grand opening for the nightclub. How he could do that blows my mind. Clearly there's something happening there, but he continued on. Now he pulls Carl in real close on the night, and he made it very clear to focus on the location. None of these ghost stories. Don't talk to people about what happened to Janet. Don't talk about things you knew from the past. Don't talk about the violent past of the location. This location is supposed to be about classic country music, not ghost stories. The grand opening ended up being a huge success. Now, something that for me didn't make a whole lot of sense in this story is that Carl ended up moving in an apartment above the nightclub. Now here's a man. He can't help but talk about all the things in this location being haunted, the things that he's seen before. And now all of a sudden he's moving into the apartment above the said haunted location? Does that make any sense? Carl, you're crazy. But anyway, that's not the only crazy story. So a little bit later, Carl's cleaning up in the storage room and he stumbles across something that's wrote on the wall. Now, this is absolutely insanely crazy. What he sees, and I'm gonna tell you what it is it's almost like a poem that says, "My love is as deep as the sea, it flows forever. You ask me when it will end, I tell you never. Never my love is as bright as the sun, as it shines forever. You ask me when it will end, I tell you never. The world may disappear like a castle of sand. I'll be waiting with my heart in my hand. You ask me when will I die, I tell you never." What? I don't know what I would think if I saw that. What in the world? That of all the things so far is probably one of the creepiest things, with the exception of the man's walking away. Carl's walking away. He's like, someone needs to see this. This is the craziest thing ever. As he steps, he feels the board is a little loose and he starts looking. He starts to pry it away. He finds a diary. Now, the front page of the diary shows this owned by a woman named Johanna. Now, Johanna, she was a dancer that performed in the nightclub back in the 1930s. Now, the diary told of Johanna having a lover who was a musician. The musician's name was Robert. And like all good stories that are always found in diaries, her father did not like this Robert guy, this musician. And her father said that if they didn't stop seeing each other, he was going to kill Robert. Now, Johanna said that she would rather be dead than to lose Robert. And without much of a surprise, you saw it coming. Robert comes up missing. Now, Johanna is scared that maybe the father made good on what he said and he killed Robert, or he had someone else kill Robert in retaliation. But y'all didn't see this coming. Johanna poisoned her father, then poisoned herself. And in her final note in the diary, she said she would roam the halls of the club for all of eternity, waiting for her lover to return. You can't make this up. This is like a story inside of a story inside of a story. I love this kind of thing. I swear, this is why I have a podcast. You can't not enjoy the direction this story's taking. Anyway, so one night, to make things more interesting, I think it was like a few nights later, Carl wakes up. He can't hardly breathe. He's gasping for air. He's thinking maybe he has some type of like a medical issue going on. He starts to kind of catch his breath a little bit, but now he can't seem to go back to sleep. I'm sure his mind's probably going a mile a minute. All of a sudden, the electric in the place goes completely out. So he starts thinking to himself, man, I need to get this power back on. Now the circuit breaker is in the basement. So he works his way down to the basement. He's walking around. All of a sudden, underneath his foot, he feels something sticking up. Now, Carl had worked there for a long time. He had never noticed it, but there's a latch on the floorboards, almost like a trap door kind of thing. So he starts kind of prying up on this latch, and the door pops open, and underneath it is like a dugout area, and it's below the basement. He finds a little rock and he releases it. Plop, he hears water. He is so absolutely stunned that he did not know this was here. How did he not know it was there before? My guess is, and it doesn't say this in the story, my assumption is he's probably always had some type of like a work boot or like a shoe on. Now he's living upstairs. He maybe had some slippers or something on. He was able to feel that indentation. Anyway, now there's water down there. He's completely confused. So he stands back up and he's like looking, and all of a sudden he hears something behind him. He turns around and he sees two men staring at him, smiling, almost like they're grimacing. almost as though they're excited that he found this little secret. So Carl ran right back up the stairs. The next morning, he comes down. He's got holy water in hand. But for real though, out of curiosity, before we continue this story, where do you just get random holy water? In some of these stories, these people always have holy water. I need to get my hands on some of that, because if I start doing ghost hunting, I'm going to need it. Anyway, he opens up the latch on the trap door. Again, now he sees there's a hole. There's almost running water there, and he pours the entire thing that he had of holy water into the well. Now, in the weeks that followed, Carl started changing. He started acting weird. Like Bobby would try to talk to him, and it was almost as though it wasn't even Carl. Now, Bobby, he was going to let it go for now. He had too much stuff going on. He didn't have time to stop and try to figure it all out. He reached out to a friend of his, Doug Hensley. He wanted him to come down to the nightclub and help him film a TV commercial. He thought maybe that would help drum up additional business to Bobby Mackey's. Now, as they were setting everything up to record it, Doug did come out and they're kind of getting everything set up. They're friends. They hadn't talked in a little while. And Doug's like, "Hey, what's going on?" He says, "Man, do I ever have a story to tell you?" He started telling him about the hauntings, what happened to Janet, Carl's weird behavior, the things they found in different spots. Oh, and the cops, what the cops saw. Now, Doug, he was confused on why Bobby would leave any of this kind of as a secret. He seemed to think that maybe this was an opportunity. But Bobby was having none of it. Bobby's like, "This isn't what I want to be known for as a ghost place. I want to be known as a classic country, kind of like a hot spot." In fact, he didn't believe in any of it, any of what happened to Carl. He believed Janet a little bit, but he struggled with almost everything else. But for him, he was curious how all this could be happening in the same location. And Doug was equally as confused, also curious. He kind of wanted to understand what was going on. So he asked if it would be okay if he spoke to Carl and Janet. Maybe he could understand what they were experiencing, because Doug also was a writer. Now, Doug wanted to question Carl and Janet, try to figure out what's going on. And Bobby was completely fine with all of it. The only thing that he asked is, "If you do this, I don't want any of this to get out into the public." Why? Because most people are scared of ghosts. He didn't want the club to be associated that way. So Doug was completely fine with it. He's like, "Listen, this will be between me and you. I just want to understand what's going on. Maybe I can write some of it out. Maybe one day we can look back on this." Bobby's like, "It's completely fine." So one day he gets with Janet and with Carl, and he kind of asks them what is going on. So Carl told him everything, said, "Hey, here's what happened before. This is the things I've seen. There was this loose floorboard. I found this diary." He also talked about the two men that was in the basement, how he found that latch in the floor and how there was a hole and it seemed to go to some type of a water source. Then there's Janet. She's talking about her stuff. Now, Doug is what I would call somewhat of a huge skeptic, but he also found the stories extremely interesting. He listened to all the stories. He passed no judgment. And Doug took that information to the library. He had some names. He had roughly some time periods. He wanted to see if any of the names fit based on the history of the building. And surprisingly, Doug found some connections with what he was told. In a publication called the Kentucky Post, Doug learned of the killing of two men, Alonzo Walling and Scott Jackson. They were both dental students. They were convicted and hung in Newport, Kentucky in 1897 for the murder of Pearl Bryan. Her headless body was found near the site of an old slaughterhouse in Wilder, Kentucky. Sound familiar? Now, Alonzo swore on the gallows. We talked about gallows earlier here. They are in active work. But he swore on the gallows that he would come back from hell and haunt everyone involved in this trial. Wait, I just thought about something completely unrelated. Little House of the Prairie, wasn't Alonzo's last name Wilder? What a weird connection. This is how my brain works, I'm sorry. Anyway, he said that he would haunt the place where Pearl's head was at. Now, with that information, Doug went right back and talked to Bobby, Janet, and Carl. He explained that Pearl's body was found and that they wanted to try to find the head, so they brought bloodhounds out, and those bloodhounds led them right back to inside that slaughterhouse. Now, it was believed that her head was disposed of in the old well that was in the basement, which was also part of a satanic ritual. Now, the head was never found. Now, I'm sure you are all following what I'm about to say next. The well of that slaughterhouse was one and the same as the well that Carl had found by mistake in the basement of the club. The club was built on the foundation that was the very slaughterhouse. Now, it was said that back in the day, satanic worshipers would pour the blood sacrifices down into that very well. Now, that well led to a pipe that then went into the Licking River. That's where all the blood would end up coming out. Now, one very interesting coincidence that I told you guys to remember earlier was Janet, how many months pregnant she was. Did you remember? Tell me in the comments down below if you remembered anyway. I said that she was 5.5 months pregnant. Johanna? Doug also found information on her. She was 5.5 months pregnant when she drank the poison. Coincidence? I'll leave that up to you to speculate. Now, Doug, he knew a psychic medium, and he asked her to come on down to Bobby Mackey's. He wanted to see if she could come up with anything that maybe he didn't come up with in the newspapers, or maybe some validation of everything. And her name was Patricia Michelle. Now, at that point, when she came in, she was already known on a national level. She was a professional in her field. She met with Carl, and immediately he wanted to tell her everything that he knew. And she stopped him and she said, "Don't tell me anything. I don't want any information." Now, almost immediately, Patricia felt the presence of a spirit. Now, the spirit that came through to her was of Johanna. Patricia asked the spirit why she still stayed at the location, and she said that she refused to leave. She wanted to stay earthbound. Now, one thing that Patricia said that's very interesting, and I guess I've never really thought about it from this standpoint. Again, you got to remember, she drank poison and she poisoned her dad. What Patricia said is that sometimes when someone passes away and they go to the other side, they have a question of what happens next. Sometimes there could be religious reasons that they're scared to move on, because then they're scared that they're going to burn in hell for eternity. So they choose to not go to the light. It's definitely an interesting thought process. And it could actually explain, in my mind, why some would refuse to not go forward, even if they didn't kill somebody. I mean, I think a lot of times religion can scare a lot of people because none of us can be completely clean. But is it enough to not want to go to see what happens next? I don't know. Interesting concept on that. But anyway, Patricia, upon going down to the basement, she looked down into the well, and there she saw a decapitated head staring back up at her. Now, Patricia later determined that the two spirits that was tormenting Carl, that was the two boys that was hung. They were attempting to use his body. Basically, she said that they could go inside of his body, and by doing that, much like other demons or senses of possession, they can smell, they can touch, they can basically experience being somewhat as though they are alive again. Now, they knew that Carl was susceptible, Patricia mentioned that Carl would probably need a minister to fight off whatever possession was going on, at least with Carl. So Doug was able to bring a Pentecostal minister. Now, upon meeting Carl, right away he knew that something was up. He was like, Carl is being possessed by a demon. And he agreed to perform an exorcism. There, with him and Carl in the kitchen by themselves, he told everyone else to stay outside. They began reciting the Lord's Prayer. And as they started to finish the prayer, Carl looked up. The minister said he had eyes as black as coal. And he says that he does not pray to anyone. Now, the pastor, he asked Carl, he said, "Who are you?" And Carl responded back saying, "Alonzo." The pastor requested that Alonzo leave the body of Carl to submit to God. Carl started to converse. He started screaming. Now, the pastor screamed for the others to come in the kitchen. "Hey, come in here. You got to help." Carl started speaking in Latin and then backwards in English. Now, later, it was said that he said that he was Satan. After a long exorcism, they placed a Bible on Carl's chest and he screamed in pain. And then, almost out of nowhere, it's almost like Carl kind of peeked through. He made it to the other side. It was, I believe he said, like he woke up from a very bad dream. He didn't remember anything, but Carl, now he was kind of like free. Whatever was holding on to him, it was no longer a part of him. And in return, he no longer wanted to be a part of Bobby Mackey. So he packed up and he left. Janet, she also, in addition to that, told Bobby that she also never wanted to return to the club. As for Bobby, he said he never experienced anything that was supernatural and he kept the building going. In fact, he still wanted to keep his dream alive. Now, this location, it's still a very active location. Some say that it's still haunted to this very day. There's been many paranormal shows that has been at this location and many paranormal investigators. In fact, tell me in the comments down below, what was your favorite paranormal show that investigated here? What do you believe? Do you think Bobby Mackey's is haunted? As for me, I do believe that there's something there. Maybe one day, Kentucky is not very far from where I'm at here in Ohio. Maybe you and I can go to Bobby Mackey's and we can see what we find there. Again, I'm sensitive to what I believe is the spiritual realm. Maybe I'll feel something there. But anyway, if you enjoyed this podcast and you've not subscribed to the YouTube channel, please, if you'd subscribe to the YouTube channel, I definitely appreciate it. Also, wherever you're listening to this podcast, please, if you could give me a rating, I would definitely appreciate that. If you're not done listening to my podcast, I have another podcast to do with my buddy. His name is Nick. The name of the podcast is Deceptive Reality. Every single week, we look at a different mystery and we try to determine if we can figure out if we can solve that very unsolved mysteries. Of course, we always have our theories. But if you enjoyed this podcast, if you give me a thumbs up, I definitely appreciate it. Until I see you on the next podcast, goodbye.